Hello, everyone. My name is Wayne Barnum. This is the second topic lecture for the 2025 MSPDP season. Your topic is animal testing is unethical. I think this is a pretty interesting motion, given how I think a lot of the rounds are going to shape out. And we're going to talk about that a lot during this. The areas we're going to cover in this lecture are going to be on emotion analysis. We're going to dive through a few of the definitions, background, some of the history on animal testing, and then we're going to delve into a little bit of framework, talking about where we think that the round should go, where it shouldn't go, and some key values for the round, given this is somewhat of a principled debate. And then we're going to delve into proposition and opposition ideas. Fair, fair. Okay, let's start with motion analysis. Animal testing comes in a number of different key categories. We can see animal testing, specifically from the National Cancer Institute 2025, being laboratory experiments of animals to study the development and progression of disease. Animal studies also test how safe and effective new treatments are before they are tested in people. We also see that when we think about animal testing, it comes in usually three categories. It comes in medical research, so we're thinking about actual like cancer research or research that more promotes human health. We think about pesticides. The research done towards animals are often affected in relationship to agricultural production. And then also in cosmetics. This is where we see a lot of the debate center around the use of animal testing when it comes to cosmetics, which aren't really needed for medical areas. Though these three aspects are usually what you're going to encounter for this debate. Okay, second part, unethical. Cambridge Dictionary 25 explains that it's morally wrong and evil and not ethical based on moral beliefs. You'll really understand what this means the more we go through the topic lecture, but understand that unethical means that on a principle level, like on a values-based level, that we oppose something, that we think that something is a net negative onto the world. Okay, a little bit of background information. Doo-doo-doo. This is good enough spot. Okay, 5 points here. We've done animal testing for a long, long time. We can go back to 300 BC to understand that Aristotle even did animal testing, and that throughout that time into the early 1900s, animal testing grew alongside medical advancements. And that often a lot of our medical progression came from testing on animals and using that knowledge to further it. We get to 1921, the second part here, Banting and Best, some of the most well-known uses of animal testing, reverse engineer insulin using animal testing, specifically using the pancreases of, I think it was dogs, to be able to have a treatment for diabetes and make people live longer. The disease that you usually wouldn't have lived that long with. What we also see here is in 1938 that the Food, Drug, and Cosmetics Act required animal testing to ensure safety of products. So we're starting to see as we enter the 1940s that we're reinforcing animal testing, and animal testing is starting to happen a bit more often because it's being reinforced, specifically in the United States, by our legislative measures. Jump a number of years over to 1966 with the Animal Welfare Act. This kind of starts the reversal of the increased use of animal testing. The Animal Welfare Act created a number of standards and specifically committees that are meant to ensure proper animal testing are done to ethical standards. Back to the idea of ethics. Jump ahead again to 1922 and we get the special edition of Russell and Birch's book, The Principle of Humane Experimental Techniques. This is one of the key books in the debate period, specifically for the proposition side. I recommend you read the cliff notes of it because it's going to explain a lot more than I could on the book in and of itself. The proposed three R's, or three key ideas when it comes to animal testing, of replacement, of finding replacements towards animal testing, of a reduction, of reducing the avenues which we have to use animal testing, and of refinement, and then of refining our measures and our ethics and the practices that we use associated to animal testing. Jump again forward to today, that book became it's very, very heavily start for the bigger trend we see right now of organizations such as PETA really taking shape and a phase out system really starting to work and measure towards the abolishment of animal testing. We also see two key things coming out in the replacement aspect as AI is starting to take shape as replacements for animal testing, and so is organ on a chip, which is somewhat of a very new piece of scientific equipment. I would suggest you look that up on your own time because it's really interesting and I cannot delve into it in this small lecture. Okay, frameworks. The debate's going to be about ethics. If you don't have a principled argumentation in the round, I think really you're avoiding the topic that's really meant to be had. This is a debate about our principles and what we believe is right or just. As a result, we can also think that the debate is about scientific advancement if we think that that is right or just, or about human animal benefit if we want to go down that route, or even the reliability of certain tests related to animal testing. We can also see that we think the debate is not about whether or not animals feel pain, because we know that that's definitive, that animals do feel pain. And the debate can also be more than just cosmetic and just medical. When you're on the first proposition team and you have to define what aspects of the round you are going to be talking about and what aspects of the round that you won't be talking about, you should include both cosmetic and medical. But if you're on the neg team, don't say that you have to defend every position when it comes to animal testing. You don't have to defend every instance of cosmetic use for animal testing, and you don't have to defend all harmful medical uses. You can explain that your side specifically promotes, if you're on the neg, medical use for animal testing that is necessary and done justly. There are a number of ways to think about it, but don't just force the debate towards one route. Instead, explain it really clearly. But then also, when we think about values for this round, there's a number of different ways we can look at it. About morality, about what we think is moral and just. We can go to utilitarianism, about the ideas of the most benefit for the most amount of people. It's a really long word. I think you should look that up on your own time. And also deontology, about the rights of animals, about the value of animal life and rights relative to humans. But then also just general life and quality of life for both animals and for people. Discuss all of those avenues in your speeches and think about trying to make one a really big thesis for your case. Really good teams cover a single one of these really, really in depth rather than trying to focus on all of them. I'd say pick one and make it a really strong case for yourself. Okay, now we're going to delve into case ideas. This one's really short compared to the other topic lecture on cell phone ban. My apologies for that one being so long. Okay, animal rights. There will be three for each side if I could move my camera. Okay, so three ideas here. Firstly, that animal testing violates animal rights. We can see it in a number of different ways. So that animals don't actually have choice when it comes to testing, much like human subjects. And a lot of the human rights standards that we have as people aren't applied onto animals. And so we see that often a number of tests done on animals cause unnecessary pain and suffering onto them. But also we see that this leads to somewhat of bad treatment across species, that humans somewhat put themselves on a pedestal because of our nature towards other animals that is really highlighted due to testing, that we're really bad towards both species and our ecosystem because we really just treat it as tools for our own advancement rather than as things to coexist in the world with. This leads to the second idea that abolishing animal testing would reduce the violation of animal rights. That if it's banned, then there's no way to violate. But it also sets a key precedent when it comes to our treatment of animals, that we are no longer allowed in scientific fields to violate the rights of animals, to abuse and harm them. And it has a lot of cascading effect. Specifically, this third idea here about promoting better standards and scientific practices. We think that because we have human rights, and that with this motion we're better able to establish animal rights to be free from unnecessary pain and suffering in the medical field. But there's less exploitation of both humans and animals in the scientific field, but also there's a better reliable focus on better treatment, about finding avenues for treatment that is just and kind towards all creatures of the earth. If you hear the plane in the background, my apologies. Okay. That's the first contention. This one is really about establishing that animals matter and humans matter, and we have to treat all creatures equally. And you can somewhat tie this towards other aspects, if you like, such as the meat industry. But that's a step away from the debate. But you can turn it into really strong impacts. If you have questions on that, go ahead and email me. Okay, scientific invalidity. Three ideas here. First, that animal testing is unreliable due to genetic differences between species. We see specifically margins of errors between species such as rats and humans when it comes to testing, that there's small differences that actually lead to differences when it comes to the outcomes in scientific research. What this actually does is makes it really bad for predicting human outcomes and similarities across species. So that when we test on rats or we test on species similar for humans, that we actually make it really bad at predicting what actually is going to happen for humans. What this then does, secondly, is it causes incorrect scientific information, that it leads to somewhat of misinformation and bad because of the sorry, let's just clarify. This causes bad scientific information due to misinformation because we get the wrong outcomes in research. What this often does is it means that we fund bad projects that are actually harmful either to people or delay the advancement of other projects necessary for us to get the most possible benefit out of scientific research related to animals. This can lead to the loss of life because we have mistreatment in the release of drugs that are harmful onto people, but also delayed results. That any advancement we try to get comes delayed, and the attempts to find treatments and cures for diseases stagger. The third part then is that abolishing animal testing would prevent death, that it forces us to test on humans, which gives better predictability when we have the closest genetic code between humans like us. But it also prevents less medical misinformation, that we have better availability when it comes from this research that is more reliable to make it easier for us to predict what actually is going to happen and make it easier for us to make adjustments when it comes to research. This, as an end result, leads to faster results and a less loss of life when we can get the necessary drugs needed to save lives at a rate that is able for us to do so. It prevents the delaying and it prevents death. That's a pretty just cause. Okay, The last idea, this is the last one, yeah. The last proposition case is about funding alternatives. Three ideas here again. You're starting to notice that they all follow a three notion structure. I think that three key ideas in a contention is pretty easy to work with. We can explain that a little more later. Okay. Firstly, that the promotion of animal testing takes away funding from alternatives. Animal testing has been over relied on for so long. And alternatives, as if we call back earlier to the lecture, such as AI and organ on a chip, are being underfunded when it comes to animal testing and overlooked as a result. This is leading to a key loss of medical advancement, where we're not trying to find alternatives and instead sticking to one part that we have proven, with the last contention, to be somewhat unreliable. This means, secondly, that abolishing would allow alternatives to prosper and get the funding that it needs in order to function. When we force less reliance on animal testing with a banning of it or an abolishment of it, then what's more likely going to happen is that scientists find other avenues that have been gaining prominence lately, such as AI and organ on a chip, to be able to promote research. They have the alternative, but they choose not to use it because animal testing is such seen as a standard. When we remove that standard, what's likely the case is that another idea will fill its seat, and AI and organ on a chip is likely to fill that seat. And that's a necessary good thing because this, thirdly, helps with scientific advancement. As we're promoting better alternatives that don't mistreat animals and don't give us wrong scientific information, but that we make it easier to get faster research as a result. Call back to this slide. And if we can do so, because we promote better alternatives that are actually more reliable than animal testing, we're likely to see a quality of life increase for all the same reasons as the previous contention. When we can get faster results and less quality and less loss of life, we're able to bring about positive change. Okay, let's jump over towards opposition real quick. To clarify something when it comes to these cases, that these are starting points, not the actual cases for you to run. If you do run these, fair play, but we want these to be starting points and want you to do your own key research because I think it's really beneficial for your own development and debate. Okay, three neg ideas. Firstly, scientific advancement. Three ideas here. Firstly, animal testing is reliable to help you with human health. There is contradictory to proposition point, really similar genetic compositions between species. And as a result, and because of all the advancements we've done towards better technology when it comes to animal testing, we're actually able to find groundbreaking research. Call back to the insulin example I had at the beginning of the slide, but also organ transplants. We learned how to do it properly through animal testing on pigs, and then also with key cancer research. Often a lot of our starting places is with animal testing. But abolishing this, secondly, would restrict health initiatives, as there's less research avenues for humans and animals to be able to get the treatment that is necessary, because without the ability to test on similar genetic compositions, there's less avenues to be able to promote health. This shuts down existing experiments that could have potentially saved lives. I want you in your own time to find an example of an experiment right now that is getting a lot of prominence due to animal testing. I'd say a good starting place might be CRISPR technology. And the key result of this also is that there is a limited testing pool. That without the variety of species such as rats, dogs, cows, pigs, and all of them, including humans, that we're shrinking the testing pool down significantly towards mostly just people. And this leads to a loss of public health, as it's much harder to get groundbreaking research without that very testing pool across species. And it's also likely to lead to loss of life over delayed development of production, of cures, of treatments, of beneficial things for scientific advancement and for our lives. But also, if you want to take this on another route, you can also explain that with limited testing pools, it means that we don't often know the effects, the treatments that we create, and the pesticides that we create will affect other species, and we're much more likely to cause harm with the advancements that we do make because we're unable to figure out what exactly we're doing. Okay. How do I go to the next slide? Okay, saving species. Three ideas here. Firstly, that animal testing has saved multiple species. We can look specifically at disease vaccines for a number of animals. With embryo transfers has saved like a number of different species. The two listed there are just starting point examples. But specifically, the case I want to talk about is about bees. Of that, using animal testing, we've been able to create superfoods for bees. We've been able to test climate resilience for bees, and we use that research to promote policy to fund beehives, literally, or make it easier for bees to exist in certain ecosystems and habitats that are helping to reduce effects of climate change, make it easier for ecosystems to survive. Animal testing on a net basis has made it easier for keystone species such as bees, keystone species such as elephants, keystone species being like species that are so necessary for environment's survival and health that they are required for environments to grow. And with the loss of them, there'd be significant harm to those species environments holistically. But secondly, Abolishing testing prevents these key research on these endangered species that specifically we don't have alternatives ready to be able to use to figure out how our scientific advancements work in relation to other animals and how we can best be able to support those animals. This means likely that if we can't test species with similar genetic composition, call back to the last contention, and it's a lot easier for us to be in a position where we have less research on disease and species longevity. What specifically we what specifically this refers to is that animals are different from humans when it comes to how and they interact with diseases in the aspects that humans have specific composition in DNA that responds to disease in certain ways, and animals and across all the animal kingdom respond differently from humans, and so it's a lot harder for us to be able to pin down their longevity when it comes to disease and their health when it comes to situations in which those species might not survive. This leads to the third part that it might cause extinction of multiple keystone species, specifically referring to bees, and that species are likely to die due to critical condition without continual development in testing, that our efforts right now have led to the saving of lives for multiple species, but without further testing and development, those species are likely to die due to the rapid changes in the world, such as climate change. The loss of keystone species, as a result, leads to larger environmental destructions, as species that are necessary to keep environments running fall apart. There's cascading effects on the entire animal kingdom, where entire ecosystems can be wiped out because plants no longer grow because they don't have the pollen from bees. And without plants, small herbivores can't eat. And without small herbivores, the predators don't get to eat. And then the apex predators don't get to eat anything. And then the whole system falls apart. You can explain this one really well, and it has really key impacts when it comes to larger holistic ideas. Okay, last one, preventing generational loss. This is a different avenue from the previous one. But it says simply three ideas. One, animal testing gives pictures across generations. Most animals have shorter lifespans than humans. There's a number of ones that are similar, more than us. I think to a number of different turtles. But most of them, like chickens or rats, are able to show generational progression in medicine and in vaccines and in disease than any other alternative we have. Specifically, research done with these types of animals contribute to long-term research for vaccine effects for animals and human health. Of that, when we create a vaccine, we test the number of following generations on a species to understand how that vaccine affects all of the following generations. Stick with me here. Second idea here is that removing testing would lead to the loss of key preventative information, that we can't really understand the scope of research, of vaccines, of disease, of medical advancements for generations in necessary timeframes. We're able to understand the effects of certain vaccines and diseases within maybe a few years because of the shorter lifespan of animal testing, regardless of the ethics. But if that's no longer the case, we have to rely on humans, or we have to rely on certain standards that prevent that longevity being able to prosper. What we see is we will either manufacture medicine without that general information or generational information, sorry, and that generally is irresponsible because we don't have the long-term understanding of disease, or it delays the release of that necessary medicine that is needed to save lives of people. The third part of this then is that this leads to wider spread of disease or death, that we don't have the full scope of disease, of vaccines, of treatment when we create them, and this can lead to the development of dangerous medicine that isn't properly tested out. And even if that's not the case, we'll have to turn towards alternatives or no alternatives at all, which would delay the medical progression needed to save a number of lives of either people, of animals, or key ecosystems necessary for the world to be able to survive the climate change. You can explain this one as we can get the information fast, and because we get it fast, we can make the key change necessary to help all of us. But without that information, we're likely to cause more harm than not. Okay, I think that's about it from me. This one hopefully is shorter. I'm going to check the time here in a minute. But if you have any questions, contact me. My email is right there. Hopefully I'll see you all October 11th at the first tournament. Until then, see you next time.